From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
The Amtrak tragedy raises grave issues about how this derailment could have occurred. We at the group deal in information and opinion, both of which are still surfacing in the derailment. Next week's program, we will have the data in hand to responsibly contribute to the public discussion, especially in any of its political dimensions. Issue 1, Democratic trade wars.
On this issue, on trade, I actually think some of my dearest friends are wrong.
A trade war broke out this week between Democrats. In the crosshairs, Trade Promotion Authority, a bill before Congress to give President Obama a fast track to congressional approval for the trade deal he is negotiating with 11 Pacific Rim countries. President Obama considers the Trans-Pacific Agreement a cornerstone of his second-term agenda and presidential legacy. Ironically, Mr. Obama's main opposition includes progressive Democratic Senators Sherrod Brown and Elizabeth Warren, whom Mr. Obama singled out for individual criticism this weekend. Quote, "She's absolutely wrong. The truth of the matter is that Elizabeth is, a politician like everybody else. And, she's got a voice that she wants to get out there. On most issues, she and I deeply agree. On this one, though, her arguments don't stand the test of fact and scrutiny," unquote. On Tuesday, 42 Senate Democrats and 2 Senate Independents disagreed and voted with Elizabeth Warren to halt a vote on Trade Promotion Authority until the White House first conceded to a vote on fair trade measures targeting China's currency manipulation and preferential treatment for African import. Next week, the Senate is expected to take up Trade Promotion Authority. If the president can persuade enough Democrats to support TPA, it would then go to the House, where liberal Democrats appear even more determined to stop Obama's Pacific Trade Agreement.
Question, why can't President Obama get fellow Democrats to back his trade negotiations? Pat.
Because working America and middle America and the unions and folks on the left have seen the extraordinary damage that's been done to the American economy. And since 1980, about John, free trade has cost us 40% of all our manufacturing jobs. We're running trade deficits now of $600 billion a year and $700 billion a year in goods. And it's hollowing out the American economy, and it's responsible for inequality and the failure of wages to grow up. At least this is the belief of American workers. And the only reason these trade deals go through is not because the country loves them or believes in them. It is the enormous power of the transnational corporations in America who need these deals to move their factories and plants over to where they can produce more cheaply, get rid of their American workers, get rid of the American regulations, and bring their goods back here. This is a battle that's going to go on and on and on. Frankly, it consumed us in the 19th century more than any issue except for slavery.
You're directing your remarks also to NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement.
Well, just take a look at what China's doing. It's a mighty military power now. We're running a $350 billion trade deficit. Billion this year with China, which is twice their defense budget.
Hello.
I think Pat makes the case for the American workers, and American workers have lost a lot, and NAFTA was way oversold, and there's a bad taste after NAFTA. Elizabeth Warren did basically gather enough Democratic support to defeat a procedural vote on Trade Promotion Authority. The next day, the president and the White House came back, and 13 Democrats did support the deal along, I think, with all the Republicans. And so the Senate now looks like it's going to support this free trade agreement. The House is going to be tougher, but I think it's still doable. Yep. Elizabeth Warren has an unparalleled ability in today's Democratic Party to elevate issues, but the president has a case to make as well. And this is a healthy debate within the Democratic Party. I happen to think this deal has been made better, and I think it's very difficult to argue against opening up markets in Asia, the biggest market in the world. and basically having China write the rules or having no rules at all. So, I mean, I think this is going to work, but it's a difficult issue in the Democratic Party because of all the facts that Pat just stated.
Hold on. What's been the experience with the U.S.-South Korea trade agreement? Has it been beneficial to us as to Korea itself? Can you speak to that?
Yes, but here's the thing. In the short term, these deals have difficulties because there is Pat is right that some jobs are lost. But in the longer term, how is America going to succeed? In a globalized economy, as I see it, it's a fundamental fact. We have to accept that. What we should be doing is using our comparative advantage, producing jobs that only we can do in the sense of producing high technology products, taking opportunity of that ownership with very large growing economies in Asia. And the secondary point as well is that, yes, although some people are hurt by this, the American consumer benefits by being able to buy things more affordably, buy whatever they want. If people simply think about what cars do people have, around this set, there will be things that bought from places abroad because that benefits us and that reduces costs for American families.
Did you ever hear of a man by the name of Sherrod Brown?
I did.
Senator Sherrod Brown wrote in USA Today this week that Democrats were promised the same things with the U.S.-Korea trade pact as Obama is promising now. But the trade deal with Korea has generated $12 billion in new imports from Korea, but only $1 billion in new exports from America. What does that suggest to you, Mort?
It suggests to me that whatever they are producing in that country, we have a huge disadvantage, and this is going to wipe out a lot of activity, economic activity here. And while I do believe in getting the best goods, you cannot do it at a cost where hundreds and thousands of people are going to lose their jobs. You've got to do it at a much different and controlled pace, because it's not fair for the people in this country to lose their jobs because of that kind of an issue.
Right.
This agreement actually has enforceable standards for labor and the environment, which other agreements have not had. And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton helped start this agreement. She called it the gold standard. So it's not perfect, but I think it's a far better deal than we've gotten in the past. And Third Way, which is a group of moderate Democrats, did a survey of the 17 trade deals completed since NAFTA, and 13 of them have been winners for this country, 4 not. South Korea is one of the losers.
Let me tell you what the problem is here. Tom talks about globalization, it's here to stay. Countries like China or Japan are economic nationalists to the core. They manipulate currencies, they keep things, they're cutting deals with us, the South Koreans too. South Koreans are saying we want to get the Americans' market on cars. What do we have to do to get it? And they give us little things. The idea that we're going to set up a worldwide system, everybody plays by the rules, is naive and utopian.
No, but see, we have to be that Japan. If we get this deal, I'm basing my support on that the Japanese are actually, that Abe is going to take on the industries.
For 50 years.
Well, but also, again, look, you talk about this is about the long term.
I can't quite hear that.
This is about the long term, right? With massively growing economies in Asia. Companies, and it is a sort of anecdotal one, but we have to have trust in the American entrepreneurial spirit to take advantage.
In the long term, we'll all be dead. In the short term, we've got to earn a living. So you've got to find some way to balance this out. It's very easy to say that.
You mentioned the entrepreneurial spirit. The entrepreneurs are taking their factories to China.
But if we have those markets, then we can produce things here.
The point is now that they're beginning to come back. Manufacturing has had somewhat of a renaissance under this president, and he's working hard at it.
12 million manufacturing workers. We had 18 million at the beginning of the century.
The whole job world has changed, and you got to recognize that. You can't fight battles that have already been lost.
Hold on, Pat. Let's put aside the question of whether or not the Pacific Trade Agreement is good for the average American. What does the president's inability to get Democrats on board tell you about his leadership?
I don't think it's a problem about his leadership. These Democrats are responding to their constituencies, they're responding to facts, they're responding to the failure of past treaties and past promises, and they're being told, look, if you're not going to defend us, who do you represent?
No, it's an honest disagreement. The Democrats took a 2x4 to his signature policy for his second term, and he responded. And I think it's a good fight, and the president did rebound. 13 Democrats did join the Republicans in the Senate. It looks like this deal is going to go through the Senate, and we're going to be talking about the House in a couple of weeks.
The president, in your book, always rebounds.
I'm not saying he's always right. He's right on this one, though.
Question, are Capitol Hill Democrats more worried about their 2016 re-election prospects than they are about Obama's presidential legacy? I ask you.
Well, obviously, but I don't. But I think, I mean, Pat, it genuinely articulates the point of view. We fundamentally disagree, but I think a lot of Democrats share that. They disagree because they believe in that economic theory. I just don't think, and look, the example is China losing jobs now to, for example, Vietnam and the Philippines. We cannot race to the bottom.
Well, Elizabeth Warren has genuine differences with the president, and with the other bills that went through last week, they did try to fix some of those. There's some compromises that can be made here.
Let's look at that a little bit more closely. Let's focus on style, not substance. Senator Warren's colleague, Sherrod Brown, thinks Mr. Obama's criticism of Elizabeth Warren crossed the line. Watch.
Senator Warren's colleague, Sherrod Brown, thinks Mr. Obama's criticism of Elizabeth Warren crossed the line. Quote, I think the president was disrespectful to her the way he did that, by just calling her another politician, by referring to her as her first name, when he might not have done that for a male senator. Perhaps I've said enough.
Question, is Brown right? Was Obama sexist? What?
Well, this is not my field of expertise, John, so I can't really give you an informed judgment. But he's got to be careful, obviously, in the language that he uses because of the megaphone that he has as the president, for goodness sake. So I can understand the reaction to it.
I think, a lot of Democrats think Elizabeth Warren walks on water, and I think he was trying to point out that she has some political impulses as well. He didn't say it in the best way.
I'll give him a pass on this one.
I don't think it's sexist.
If anything, it shows a personal relationship, saying Elizabeth.
Excuse me, why is Hillary straddling the fence on trade?
For the same reasons I've given you, John. The base and the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, unions and blue-collar workers and these folks that have put them in power for years, they abhor these deals because they've seen what's happened to them and their fathers.
The energy in the Democratic Party is with the progressive wing. She doesn't want to offend them, but her past remarks suggest she's going to be for this deal, and if it does go through the House in the next couple of weeks, she can probably avoid making any strong statements.
It's a question. Will Trade Promotion Authority, hitherto known as Fast Track, pass the Senate next week, yes or no? Pat?
If it's a problem in the House, it'll pass the Senate.
It'll pass the Senate. They need to get 30 votes in the House. It's doable.
Yeah, I think it'll pass.
You do?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it'll pass comfortably in the Senate.
You do?
Yeah.
Don't forget the McLaughlin Group has its own website, and you can watch this program or earlier programs on the web at any time from anywhere at McLaughlin.com. Issue 2, the Camp David Discord.
Mr. President, you spoke about the situation in the region, and we look forward, God willing, to working with you to overcome the challenges and to bring about calm and stability in the region.
Camp David was busy this week as the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, met there with President Obama. The GCC was established in 1981 and is formed by the Middle Eastern nations of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. But this summit was no social call. Concealed in the Maryland mountains, tensions between the GCC and America are nevertheless obvious. Indeed, King Salman of Saudi Arabia turned down President Obama's invitation to the summit and sent Crown Prince bin Nayef in his place. Why the rancor? Because the Gulf Cooperation Council worries that President Obama is allowing Iran to become a nuclear superpower, and GCC nations doubt the president's commitment to their security. They've issued stern requests. First, the GCC wants Mr. Obama to allow them to import high-technology U.S. military equipment. Until now, that provision has been limited to ensure Israel's military superiority in the region. But the GCC also wants America to establish a ballistic missile defense system that would protect them from potential Iranian missile attack. And as indicated by ongoing GCC military operations in Yemen, these U.S. allies are warning that without American support, they will take aggressive, destabilizing action alone.
President Obama at Camp David.
The United States is prepared to work jointly with GCC member states to deter and confront an external threat to any GCC state's territorial integrity that is inconsistent with the UN Charter.
Question, should President Obama give the GCC what it wants? Tom Rogan.
Should give it some of what it wants, which is a good consolidation. Look, if he's going to pursue his nuclear strategy with Iran at the moment, and he wants to have influence in terms of restraining some of the politicization of sectarianism and fear in the Middle East, he has to yield to the GCC in terms of military technology. If he doesn't want to do the ballistic shield. But the problem with the statement you just saw is it's typical Obama foreign policy in the sense that it hedges. He says, we'll consider what we'll do, but the GCC, again, it's about paranoia. You have to be confident. You have to build confidence there if you want to restrain them from doing some of the crazy things that they tend to do.
John, they are terrified in the GCC of Iran. And basically what they want is a NATO-type agreement where the United States is automatically committed to go to war if one of them is attacked by Iran because they're terrified of Iran. But we can't give that to these states there. And Barack Obama, the principal foreign policy goal of his second term is basically this deal with Iran and a détente of some kind with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that is hemlock to these folks because they're more terrified of Iran than they are of ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
Well, if Iran invaded Saudi Arabia, I think there's no question that the U.S. would come to Saudi Arabia's aid. But they're not going to put that in writing. This is about a shifting of the power of balance in that region. And these other countries, the Sunni countries there, because they sit on all the oil, they've been, king not only in their countries, but king of the world for some time. If this agreement works with Iran, there's kind of a détente between Iran and the U.S., and Iran has gained a lot more power in the region since the unfortunate invasion of Iraq. We don't need these countries as much as we used to, and that they're feeling very uncomfortable about that. So this, you may say Obama hedges a lot. This calls for a lot of deft diplomacy because you got to reassure them without pumping more armaments into those countries and encouraging some sort of an arms race.
Well, there's a different view on that, Alan. In recent days, Obama administration officials have spoken of the talks as the prelude to bringing Iran fully into the world community and encouraging the emergence of a new Iranian leadership and maybe even the end of the historic Sunni-Shiite rivalry. The Saudis see these as naively dangerous objectives. So where does that leave your assertions of a moment ago?
President Obama has said Iran does lots of terrible things. A nuclear-armed Iran would be even more dangerous. He wants to get the nuclear agreement, and maybe at some point in the future their behavior will change. But those are two independent things, and he's not counting on a new Iran to burst forward.
Do you think Obama's negotiations with Iran has driven a wedge in the U.S.-Saudi relationship?
It's made them nervous.
A wedge? That doesn't even come close to describing it. When you have the king of Saudi Arabia and his sons coming, basically not willing to deal with the United States after all of these years, and all of the allies that we had in that part of the country are basically looking away from us because they don't think we're an ally any longer. It's the most serious breach of our relationship with those countries that we've had since the end of World War II.
Wait a minute. This was a snub. Yes or no?
A snub?
A snub. They knew what they were doing.
Snub? Of course they did. It's not just a snub. It tells something very, very serious when they make this very clear that they don't want to deal.
In that political culture, it is a very great affront. I actually thought it was a mistake.
They're waging war on their neighbor. I think it's understandable that the aged leader doesn't come here.
Look, this is where the world is going. And the point you were making earlier is, look, in terms of power, in the Persian Gulf, if there's peace in the Persian Gulf, 80 million people in Iran and 30 million south of Baghdad in Iraq, Shia, are going to dominate the Persian Gulf, whether the Saudis like it or not in the long run.
Question. Why did Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa al Khalifa choose to attend a horse show with Queen Elizabeth instead of a Camp David summit? Saudi Arabia's new monarch, King Salman, declined to attend the Camp David summit.
That was the major step.
He's bombing Yemen. Let me tell you, he's bombing Yemen. I think they've gotten themselves into their own Saudi Vietnam by bombing the
The
Houthi
Saudis
rebels
will get a
in
nuclear
Yemen.
weapon, right, if they're concerned. You have to stop them from doing that because you want to insulate away from the tensions in the region. But our credibility, again, Assad is still using chemical weapons, and John Kerry this week said that deal that Putin brokered with Assad proves the relationship works.
Be careful of that chair, the way you hit it. President Obama has a high estimation of his transformative powers, but is ending the Sunni-Shiite rivalry truly within his grasp, or is it evidence of delusions of grandeur?
It's 1,500 years old, this split, John, and I don't think Barack Obama is going to close it.
Exit question. Will President Obama agree to give the Gulf Cooperation Council the security guarantees and military equipment it wants? Yes or no, Pat Buchanan?
He'll give them he's going to give them, obviously they've got security guarantees, he's going to give them some weapons. No NATO treaty for the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Verbal assurances, joint military exercises, there are things you can do short of committing a U.S. umbrella on these countries.
If you think those countries are going to accept, a sort of a little graffiti and things like that as a way of dealing with their security, they are not going to do it. I would not have done what the president
What
has
are
done.
they going to do?
What would you give them?
What are they going to do?
I would not have.
Seriously.
All of this comes out of one thing. The president's almost
Ramadi today.
It's almost one thing,
I know, but
okay?
what are they
His
gonna-
commitment. His
And
commitment.
John.
What are the Gulf Arabs going to
Excuse me a
do
second. Let
if
me
we
ask
don't
me
give
the
them a
question.
NATO?
Let me give. The one thing that we didn't have to do was to try and make a deal with a country like Iran, which is the
I'm
most
asking
radical.
you what the Gulf Arabs are going to do if we don't give them their NATO.
We can live with that. Issue 3, Island Showdown.
有关的建设
The relevant construction work is conducted within Chinese sovereign territory, is reasonable, understandable, and legal, and it's not targeting or affecting any other country. We hope relevant countries and relevant sides can put it into perspective.
China is making islands. In recent months, China has significantly ramped up construction programs, notably in the Spratly Islands chain of the South China Sea. And that's fueling a growing crisis because the Spratly chain is not recognized as Chinese territory. Nations including Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam also claim sovereignty over some of these islands. But by dumping sand, as photos from Jane Defense prove, China has been able to build airfields and new military facilities. America and its allies are not a little concerned. Consequently, the Pentagon wants to conduct U.S. Navy patrols within the 12-mile traditional sovereignty limit of China's artificial islands. It fears that without American resolve, China will steal the South China Sea. But here's what Admiral Locklear, head of U.S. Pacific Forces, says defense cuts are doing to his power.
Reduce my ability to manage crisis space and provide options to the President and the Congress, and diminishes United States' prestige and credibility in the region.
And there's more. China also claims other island chains like the Japanese-claimed Senkaku Islands of the East China Sea. But President Obama insists the U.S. military will defend these islands if China uses force to try and seize them.
And let me reiterate that our treaty commitment to Japan's security is absolute, and Article 5 covers all territories under Japan's administration, including the Senkaku Islands.
Question, why is China constructing artificial islands in the South China Sea? I ask you, Tom.
Because they want to displace American power, because they want to take ownership of the potential energy supplies there, the fishing routes, but again, essentially, it's trying to provide themselves as the regional hegemon, and that's why we can't allow it, because it would destroy the rule of law. China is trying to become an imperial power. We have to stand for the rule of law. They cannot just simply build islands hundreds of miles from where they are.
Hold on. Does China have nuclear submarines?
No, China runs on diesel submarines, I believe, which are quieter but coastal defense. But China has nuclear weapons and a strong military. But we do as well.
I think they have nuclear submarines, and I think they're parked in Hainan.
They're building submarine bases all around there, but their submarine capability is not ours.
Why is all that going on?
Because they want to displace America. They want to push us out.
The South China Sea, they claim is territorial waters.
There?
Big trade routes as well. It's a problem.
The South China, they claim is territorial waters. However, the islands, if you build on those islands, there is a 12-mile limit around them. And if your Navy goes in the 12-mile limit, and that is land that they declare as their own, that is a violation of sovereignty, as if you fly over these islands. What the Chinese are saying, Go ahead and use the South China Sea for commercial and travel, and even the Navy, but don't go into our sovereign territory. And if we go in there, I think you can expect a collision with the Chinese Navy.
Well,
Did you know that I was in Hainan?
Hainan?
Did you know that I was there?
Yeah, it was probably during the Nixon era, John.
You know why I went there?
What, to negotiate with the Chinese?
No, I wanted to swim.
Okay.
In addition to that, I found a lot of good company there, and learned a lot.
Well, good for you.
But Hainan is a real.
Hainan is a huge.
It's
base.
a real gem.
It's a huge base in the South China Sea, but
Right.
it's much closer to the north end of the sea.
Right.
Well, China takes an expansive view of their territory, and they view the South China Sea like we view the Gulf of Mexico. But the U.S. is in an awkward position because we've got the Philippines, we're a treaty ally, and the other countries that are disputing China are our friends. So it's difficult to just stand by and do nothing while China bullies these other nations. But if you're going to go in there, you have to think it through. If you provoke China, then what?
Let me see if we can squeeze this in. What will be accomplished by U.S. Navy patrols in close proximity to the artificial islands? I ask you more.
Well, I think it'll obviously give us a lot more and easier access to understanding what's happening in China. And that's exactly what we, I think, would like to have in day
send a
one.
message to China, basically, to back
There
off.
are major trade routes. They cannot cede them.
Predictions, Pat.
Israeli-Hezbollah collision growing imminent.
Eleanor.
Draft Joe Biden for president super PAC ramping up by the end of May, June, just in case.
Tom.
Good one from Pat, but I'm going to say that the Iranian cargo ship on its way to Yemen next week could cause a major showdown with the U.S. Navy.
Mark.
The contraction in the economy for the most recent month and the second time in 3 months means we're going to be looking at a very, very weak economy, much weaker than most people have thought for the rest of the year.
Mort, listen to this. Consumers are hanging on to their money because a damaging psychology of deflationary expectations has taken hold in the United States. The early evidence takes the form of flat consumer spending despite a stronger employment outlook and consumer relief at the gas pumps. Deflation means consumers expect tomorrow's prices to be lower than today, and that spells a big drag on GDP growth going forward. Do you understand all that?
I did understand that.
You
yes.
like it, don't you?
Well, some saving is good, though.
Bye-bye.